So this month we've been doing a series on action and reflection. And last week we focused on action. This week's reflection. Next week is adaptation. So today I want to talk about action and reflection and open up space around that. And it's not just any kind of action. What I want to talk about is purposeful action. Where we have intentions that arise from our original nature, which is really where our sense of purpose comes from. And this connection we have with life, this is how I've been exploring it for myself lately. I feel like I have, as a being that's interconnected with life, I feel what life wants. And then when I act on that, I'm acting on my sense of purpose. Often has a lot to do with decreasing suffering in the world or tending to the flourishing of life, both for myself and for others, and for the world of nature as a whole. And I do believe that we have this innate sense of purpose and this innate creativity connected with that, which I talked about a lot last week, reflecting on as a community. So we have the ability to tap into that and then take action in the world. And today I want to talk about what comes after that, which is the reflection stage, where we have this great chance to play with the consequences of our actions and the feedback that emerges after we do something, which for me, this stage is one of the most creative places. It's even more creative than the action phase, because I feel like when I'm in action, I get so lost in it. I can't really see what's going on. I'm not really sure how I'm showing up or what the impact is or what all is going on, because I'm doing something. But then it's after that little pieces of information start to present. This is my experience. Little pieces of information start to present to me about how I'm showing up in the world. And especially the parts of myself that I didn't see as I was taking action. The parts of myself that I wasn't even aware of, and the elements of what I was doing that I didn't see. Other people show me in the feedback they share, or, in the way they respond or react to what I'm doing. And one area that really get to interact with in this reflection stage is really the ego, just such a big part of what makes up, my being, but it definitely tends to hide. It gets so hidden, especially when I feel like I'm so connected to this deeper sense of purpose, really acting on that. That self-righteousness of being like, well, what I'm doing is, inspired by God, so all the ego's kind of like just dusted right out of it, just like burned up in the fire of this beautiful intention. Well, if I've ever said myself, well, ego's been eliminated from this, Oh my goodness. Only eliminated from my awareness, but not at all eliminated from what's actually happening. It's like saying, you know, I went somewhere, but my body wasn't involved at all. I just like went there and did thing, and my body just wasn't even part of that. So it's kind of funny. Um, and I had a whole phase, my spiritual journey where I was intent on the annihilation of the ego. I think I was reading some Sufi mysticism a little too literally. And turned out that wasn't going to be possible. And that was actually going to lead to even less awareness of what my egos really was doing. So then I moved into this new phase where I'm way more relaxed, and I've been trying to befriend my ego and bring it closer so I can see it with little mantras like mistakes are okay, rough edges are okay, to kind of move me out of defensiveness and out of um, a need to be right or a need to be perfect, because then I'm less open to learning, and then I'm less open to seeing, and then I lose my chance to reflect, because now when I'm taking action, I'm thinking, I wonder what mistakes I'm making now, right as I'm doing the thing. I'm sure there's some things I'm not aware of, and I'm sure that I'm going to have a mixed impact. And as much as I really want to help, I'm probably going to do some harm too. Really curious to find out what that is. Go into it like that and say, well, maybe I'm not just here to have you know, be perfect, but maybe I'm here to learn, and that's part of the whole journey too. And I'm trying to learn how to work with this beautiful intention that I do have, this beautiful sense of purpose. But how does that purpose show up in the world? And how do I find a place for my gifts and my impact? How do I become more skillful? So I've learned to try to, when I reflect on what I've done, and not only what I did, but what I thought while I was doing it, I'm learning to be comfortable to see my own delusions, because there always are. You know, what what false assumptions was I operating on? Those will show up to me. Those will talk to me through different people, through they'll just show up. I find, how can I learn to think differently and to act more effectively and to let go of um, some of these patterns that just um, are the delusions of the ego as they're created. So as an example, I've been an activist for my entire adult life, ever since my first protest against the Iraq War. I remember going out and lighting candles with other college students, and we lined the streets of this small Vermont town where I went to college. And in my heart, I felt there's no way we'll be going to war. There's too many of us out here on the streets holding candles and knowing that there really aren't any weapons of mass destruction, and that this war would be an overreaction. It wouldn't be the right action for the nation. Well, it's interesting because it's like my mind saying like, well, this will be the impact of you being out here with all these other people. It will stop this war, and then there'll be no more of these wars. There'll be a disarmament, and we'll all get rid of nuclear weapons, and all this will happen, so quickly. Just rippling forth from this, my first little baby action of, just responding to someone else's invitation to come show up at the chapel and get a candle and go out there. But it's amazing how, my mind wanted to say, like, well, this will be the impact. It's like, that would be nice. But the impact was much smaller. The impact of my action was much smaller than, the grandiosity of the ego of what it might imagine the impact would be. And that's one of the patterns I've dealt with. So I noticed, through, further reflections on my activism over the years, I saw that I could at times be operating out of a false sense of urgency related to kind of an overestimation of my own importance, in this overall. And I saw in the last couple of years, a big insight is, well, I've been measuring, I had a pattern in my mind of measuring history and measuring the pace of change by my own lifespan. I didn't realize I was doing that for years. But then I realized, well, that's a very egoic approach to, assessing the pace of change relative to what I am doing as an individual. Like if I go out there with that candle and the Iraq war still happens, I'm saying, wow, I'm so disappointed because the pace of change is way slow. I woke up to this peace movement 3 weeks ago, but the world hasn't yet, as a whole. Well, but then I looked at like in a bigger picture and I was like, well, if I don't see the scale of change related to my own action or my own lifespan as a measuring stick, well, then maybe it doesn't seem so slow. Maybe it doesn't seem so um, like I'm going to get somewhere if I, bring even more strength into it, put my back into that action even more with like, this is what I'm talking about, the false sense of urgency being like, well, I have to then have an even more intense action. And I got to bring all this anger in it. And I got to bring all this power into it. And I got to do something really dramatic. And then I saw, well, in the process of trying to have an even bigger impact than I was really supposed to have, that in itself took me out of alignment with the actual pace of change, with the actual movement of the universe, which is more like a beckoning than a forcing. And I moved out of the beckoning and I'm moving into this forcing, which is so ego driven. And as an activist, I had to see that. I had to learn that. And I had to say, some of my actions with this level of intensity are even part of the problem that I'm trying to solve. Maybe there's a violence in that over urgency when I'm too caught up in changing things relative to kind of my accomplishment, my action, my lifespan. So I needed to let go of that to just take my place as, one of millions, one leaf on a tree in one season, but the tree will live for hundreds of seasons. And my life is small and insignificant, but I have a job to do. But it's part of something greater and part of a beckoning of life. I feel like we're always being beckoned onto this path of beauty, living life with beauty, living life with a greater intimacy with ourselves, with others, with this whole world. And this is like this beckoning onto this path of greater connection, like coming back into the fullness of life. And yes, I have learned that, yes, if the ego gets all charged up and is really kind of like trying to maximize and trying to kind of amplify so much, it actually pushes me away from the intimacy. Kind of like the ego grows, it like pushes me out of being on that path. So that's just one lesson I've learned from reflection. Very personal to me. We're all going to have very different creative processes with how we bring reflection to what we're doing. But I want to just open this invitation to the community, especially when we're trying to embody our purpose, to allow ourselves so much space to learn in this journey, to reflect, to admit we were completely wrong, or 80% or 50%. It's all okay, because even the learning is so much of the reason for the whole experience in my mind. There's so much we're here to learn how to hold this precious experience that we have, and to dance with the world and to show up in ways that both really are creative and expressive, and yet don't push everything else away, and are gentle and are connecting. And my hope for our community is that we'll have space to reflect together, and we'll have space to have that good humor and humility, to have room for mistakes amongst each other, and have room for being, whoops, well, I was acting way out of zone, with some silly idea, that my mind just kind of made right up. And that we could have that grace, as a community, so we could really be this community of learning, where people have that freedom to show up and take a shot at what they're doing, and then have space to reflect and learn, and then show up again, rather than too much rigidity, where it's kind of like, well, it's got to be perfect if you're going to try something. And if it's not perfect, then, get out of here. So we want it to be like that kind of community, where it's kind of like, well, let's acknowledge some of the messiness of all this, and have that grace as a community, that we're all learning, and that we're all in it together, and having a spaciousness and valuing the learning itself as part of the creative process and part of the journey that we're here for.